Today's January 7th, 2012, and we're going to talk about something other than politics today, which it's a different news story, but I think it's appropriate, and it's a very sad one. And so prepare yourself for either agreeing or disagreeing or coming somewhere in the middle on this, but I think it's very appropriate, especially if you're in college. And the story's in the Washington Post. I provided a link, and I'll provide verbatim and try to shorten this up. Man who fled only crash gets 20 years. Drunken driver left 3 friends dead or dying. A young Rockville man who crashed his car and fled from the scene, leaving 3 of his friends dead or dying, was sentenced to 20 years in prison Thursday after an emotional hearing that revealed the deep rift of the wreck that brought a once close-knit community apart. Kevin Coffey, 20, told a packed courtroom that he was deeply sorry for the May 15 crash that killed Spencer Dat, 18, John Hoover, 20, and Haley McGuire, 18. The group rode with Coffey between 2 late-night parties that included drinking and that were hosted by acquaintances whose parents were not home, authorities have said. Coffey, sobbing and rocking as he stood to hear his sentence, said he did not know there were people in the car when he walked away from the wreck. If he had, he said he would have stayed. I never intended to leave my friends, Coffey said. He said that the night of the crash, he was such a blur, and when he came to on the grass, he felt overwhelming fear and terror. Throughout the 3-hour hearing, a line of parents and siblings of the victim stepped up, and through tears, with sharp anger, and sometimes with both, shared intimate memories to underscore their losses, of a niece writing to the tooth fairy, a brother swapping music, a son strong and tall at his basketball games. The families, the state's attorney, and the judge said they wanted to send a message about underage drinking and driving that would go beyond the nearly 300 people seated and standing, shoulder to shoulder, inside the Montgomery County courtroom. A culture of recklessness must end, said Judge Teresa M. Adams as she prepared to deliver Coffey's sentence. Adults not only tolerate, but sometimes empower it, she said. And addressing all those young people in the courtroom, it must stop. Adams imposed a 40-year sentence, suspended all but 20 years. Coffey's attorney had asked his client receive no more than 18 months, the state minimum for involuntary manslaughter. Coffey was a student at James Madison University, pleaded guilty in November to 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter and 1 count of failure to remain at the scene of the crash on only Laytonsville Road. He will not be eligible for parole for another 5 years, prosecutors said. The sentence will never bring back Johnny, Haley, or Spencer, said Hoover's mother, Carolyn Hoover, but the judge did what the prosecutors asked her to, and that's the best we could hope for. It is horrible to simply abandon your friends as they are dying for no other reason than to try to avoid the consequences for your actions, prosecutors wrote in their sentencing request. Coffey's mother, Ellen Coffey, told the court that she takes fault for the lack of parenting as she and her husband battled illness. And please listen to this. Breast cancer for Miss Coffey and her husband, advanced Alzheimer's disease. She apologized, saying, "There's nothing I can do to take away the pain. I'm sorry that this incident has brought apart our community." John McGuire, Haley McGuire's father, didn't attend the sentencing, but gave a statement to a family member to read aloud. In it, he wrote that he could not bear to come because I don't want to give Kevin Coffey the opportunity to unburden himself with an apology. I'm sorry is not enough. So, what we have here in this situation, I think that the judge and the prosecutors have failed this case. And let me tell you why. Drinking and driving was a big part of this problem. However, I don't want to analyze the grief of the parents or the friends of the 3 victims. It's a tragedy these kids were killed so young and so unnecessarily. However, I do think the grief is misappropriated. But that's where the judge and the prosecutors in Olney screwed up. Coffey, the defendant, his mother has breast cancer and a father that has advanced Alzheimer's disease. And for those of you who don't know, Alzheimer's is an incurable disease. Every victim succumbs to it eventually, sooner or later. At 20 years old, I can't imagine what this kid's burden is, the burden he is bearing. And you see, when a parent becomes ill, you put the burden on yourself to succeed and make life especially easy on the parent. However, at 20, when you're working on a college degree and you're trying to find out how to be successful and you don't know which path you want to take, you don't have a clue sometimes. It's very common for 20. So any of these 3 victims in this incident could have been the driver. They were all out. They were all drinking too much. Okay, the Washington Post, as usual, failed to point out other details of this case. They only described the pain and suffering of the children or the parents that had children who were lost. Kevin Coffey did not kill sober people. He didn't kill a sober guy crossing the street. He was involved in a bad decision that was a group decision, that was to get in the car with a drunk driver. Now, yes, he needs to pay the consequences. However, for this judge to go so far out of her way, Judge Adams, and for these prosecutors to not recognize the other details of this, that these kids were intoxicated, they were all taking part in recklessness, and that unfortunately only 2 survived. There was 2 surviving victims, 3 dead. It's awful. And these other parents, and it's understandable. At 25, I don't have any kids myself, but to lose a kid, I've heard, is the worst thing that can happen to a human being in the world. And it's understandable that their grief is scattered. However, this is where the judge and the prosecutors need to be professionals. Okay? I'm conservative on a lot of things. I think if someone screws up intentionally, they need to pay the price. Pro-death penalty, strong sentencing. But in this case, maybe I have a little bit of a soft spot for developing people. Okay? Because at 20, this kind of a decision, it's an awful one that a lot of people make, but that people, that this kid is going to be held accountable and have to do the time for the decision that was made. And look, running from a situation, it's awful. It's no excuse for it. However, I don't want to put myself in a position to say I've looked at 3 of my dead friends and known what to do. I can't say that. And the Post doesn't point out either that the police found Coffey 3 hours later, and there were cops at the scene close to after the crash happened. They just found Coffey later. It's obvious that this was going to be tracked, but what I want to focus here is on the judge's responsibility and the prosecution's responsibility. After we pointed out here that the bare minimum in Maryland is 18 months. For vehicular manslaughter. So to go further than that by so much, to send a message in this case, I think this is a matter of prosecutors and a judge succumbing to pressure from a town and not addressing the real issue, going overboard with drinking, it's also drinking and driving. But it's also to send a message, don't get in the car with a drunk driver. In this case, they failed to send that message home. And Kevin Coffey, 20, to be bearing 2 sick parents as a burden on your shoulders, and then to make a decision like this, which I wouldn't put past anyone. It doesn't have anything to do with the results of what happened, but it should have been taken into account while the sentencing was being done. Because, these parents lost their kids, but the mother of Coffey is about to lose her son and her husband. Look, when you're talking about making a judgment on whether somebody's guilty or not, that's one thing. You don't take anything else into account but the action. But when you're taking sentencing into account, you do take that into account. Is somebody's situation. Many are going to disagree with me on this. Many are going to think he should have had the book thrown at him and that a lesson needs to be learned here. But if you don't agree with me on this, at least a little bit, then that means you have never been in the situation of understanding the pain of being a young person with so much pressure. These other kids, I feel it's a tragedy, but it was a group mistake. These parents that demanded that this judge put this kid away for so long, they wanted Mrs. Coffey to lose her son, or to come as close to losing her son as they did their children. Which might be understandable, I don't know. I haven't been in this situation. But the judge and the prosecutors needed to recognize that. Make a decision based on the situation. And this is going to be unpopular. But I'll go to bat for this kid. And I'll say that he needs more than prison. Okay? He needed somebody before this crash. Somebody in that community needed to step up and mentor this kid at 20 years old. Nobody did, it sounds like. And you can only pray for these families of these victims. But I think that you also need to pray for Coffey and his parents, because This was not malicious. This kid made a big mistake, a cowardly mistake. Expect a 20-year-old to know what to do in that situation. These judges failed. This prosecutor failed. They should have sent a better message than throwing the book at a kid who's got two terminally ill parents, who was involved in a group bad decision.